writing tests for your software and being able to know that it works properly is super important. This is actually one of the biggest benefits that software developers created out of their own in the last tens of years, starting with the extreme programming and more. So we, as top-tier on-call programmers, love writing tests because we like the idea that we can already assert stuff about our code without getting a page on 2 a.m. So we love writing tests. However, there is still the question if you could get the same amount of assurance in your code, in the fact that your code runs properly, but still writing less tests. So I'm not saying not writing tests, but what are the techniques to write less tests? Because most of the material on the internet and the extreme programming tells you how to write tests. But I want to also tell you how to not write tests, how to write less tests and still have the same coverage. Okay, so let's start with the 5 methods for writing less tests. The first method is writing simpler code. Let's take for an extreme a very complex code. If you have a very complex code, sometimes the only way to understand and comprehend this code is to write a test against it to understand it. Now let's take on the other extreme a very simple code. It's so simple you don't need to write any test to check it. Okay, so let's not take now these extremes. You have some combos, you write some code, or you have pre-existing code. The more complex it is, and you want to start that it's working, the more effort you would need on the testing phase. Otherwise, you will not know if it's working properly or not. You will not know if your change made a regression. It's simply incomprehensible. You must write tests all over the place to understand what's going on in the system. So the first principle is to simplify, solidify the code. The second principle in writing less tests is to use code generators. Let's take, for example, the compiler. Let's treat it as a code generator. You write some code and it translates it to another language. Okay, it generated code for you. Do you test this generated code? When I compile the code of Java, do I then write tests on the language that it compiled to? I'm so sure that this generator code is working properly that I'm not writing tests. I'm writing end-to-end tests. I'm writing tests to my source code, but I'm not writing tests on the generated code. Now, this is one extreme. When you generate code, you need to decide for yourself if you need to test it or not. But sometimes the code generator is only creating a very simple code that you don't need to unit test this very simple code. You need to do a component test, but not a unit test to this generated code. So code generators, which are very predictable, can allow you to write less tests. So all these techniques do not mean that you need to write less tests if you use them. It's not a magic bullet. They only means that we can look also at another perspective of how to write less tests with some techniques. Okay, the third technique for writing less tests is less focus on the unit test and more focused on testing the overall behavior. So we all know the triangle of testing where the end-to-end tests are at the top point of the triangle, and unit tests are at the bottom. But having too many unit tests at the bottom is problematic. They don't test much. They test little components. You can use them as a tool to make sure that your code is written properly, that the input to your function and the output makes sense for test-driven development. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's much, much better to test a whole component than small unit test. If you have a very complex, if you have a getter function, do you need to test it? No. Therefore, there is a whole set of functions that we don't need to test. We need to test the component as a whole. This was the third technique of writing less tests. The fourth technique of writing less tests is using some better tools, such as a highly compiled language or transpiled. For example, if you are writing your code with JavaScript, the minute you move to TypeScript, you need to write less tests, because TypeScript is first a language that is used a lot. It's not something that just pops up and will go away. It will stay here. And secondly, with TypeScript, you get like a semi-compiler and transpiler, and it would find errors. So there is someone for you to find errors. So there are linters, but the compiler is also an option. So simply moving to a language, let's say from two languages that already have built in the ability to test your code, for example, with compiler, it's very strong. Means you need to write less tests. The fifth and last method of writing less tests is the ability for you to create the tools, to create the infra that will write the test for you. For example, to create an infra that would run past traffic on your current traffic and tell you if there is a difference. So you can think of a whole set of tools in this area. Tools for monitoring that you use, tools that rerun past traffic, tools that rerun what users are saying, tools that test how automatically what is the load on your server and whether there is a regression. All these tools that can run on each release of your software can have you write less tests because they are running automatically tests on your server. They are finding exceptions in your log. They are checking automatically in many ways whether your codes run properly or not. So to sum up, tests are very good. Tests are super important. Tests are one of the highest peaks that software developers manage to affirm in their work processes. However, we as top-tier on-call programmers think also of how to simplify and be able to write less tests. And the 5 techniques that we specified is 1. Simplify the code base. 2. Use generated code and generators. 3. Focus more on the component level and less on the unit test level. 4. Use a higher compiled languages such as TypeScript instead of JavaScript. And 5th, use automatic testing frameworks that automatically test your application. I hope you enjoyed this. I think this was very interesting, and see you next time.